Yeah, it's John G. Sutton here. Thank you very much for watching this Tales from the Jails. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about why I took up the cudgels against the Prison Officers Association and attempted, with some degree of success, to form a independent trade union to represent the non-supervisory grades of the prison service. Well, you see, when I joined the prison service in January of 1975, prison officers were actually paid more than police constables, believe it or not. And by the time we got to 1979, the disparity between the rates of pay for a prison officer and the rates of pay for a police constable were quite considerable. And not only was that the case, but the actual role of the prison officer was being diminished, and that the actual scope for making this a career was slowly being eroded. Anyway, uh, for instance, let me tell you this. It was possible during the 1970s for a prison officer to start work at 7 o'clock in the morning and work through till 9 o'clock at night. That's a 14-hour shift, yeah? And be paid 12 and 3/4 hours. So for 1 1/4 hours, he didn't receive any pay, but he was still ostensibly on duty or available for duty or at the behest of the governor or whoever was in charge of the prison. Whereas in the rest of the civil service, because prison officers were civil servants, there was such a thing as flexi time. So you could actually be in your work, say, at 10 o'clock in the morning and work till, say, 5, and you'd be paid for all the hours that you were in. Between 10 and 5 you'd be paid. Not so for the prison staff. Between 7 in the morning and 9 o'clock at night you'd be paid 12 and 3/4 hours. So there was, and that had been negotiated by the POA. They had allowed that to happen. So this was a great bone of contention, and it was decided by the executive of the POA that there would be industrial action. Now, let me go on to the next thing here. With the industrial action, it was decided that there would be no overtime. Staff wouldn't work overtime. So this order came down from the National Executive, and at Strangeways prison there was a meeting called by the POA into all the staff, and the chairman of the POA, a man called Brian Baldwin, Principal Officer Brian Baldwin, announced to the staff that he'd entered into an agreement with the governor that whilst they would be instituting industrial action, they would not be enforcing the regulation of no overtime. So there was still going to be overtime, you lucky lads. Seriously. So they'd done that. Also, in the industrial action that was stipulated by the National Executive of the POA, it was decided that there was going to be all the non-essential services were going to be closed, such as the laundry and all the rest of it, all going to be shut. But the local branch of the POA at Strangeways, led by Principal Officer Brian Baldwin, they negotiated with the governor that at Strangeways it would all remain open. Absolutely as if nothing was happening. And during that time, there was such a thing known as compulsory overtime. In other words, you were scheduled, your contract was 40 hours a week. That was your basic 40 hours for which you got paid. But they could instruct you, and they wouldn't even consult you. It was your weekend off. You work weekend on, weekend off, yeah? So when it came to your weekend off, very frequently you were called in. They called it being called in. So you'd be called in on a Saturday or a Sunday. And if you volunteered, you could be called in both days. So you'd be working 14 consecutive days without a day off. And not only that, the overtime consisted of being called in to work late shifts. So instead of finishing at 5:30, which was your scheduled time, you'd be required to work till 9 o'clock at night. You might get one or two of these a week. A lot of staff volunteered to do this. There was one guy there, his name was Bennett, Prison Officer Bennett. Now this guy loved overtime, and he would volunteer to work late shifts all the time. Seriously. He did about 20 shifts on the run overtime. So much so that he earned the sobriquet, the nickname, Coco Bennett. Coco Bennett called because at night, round about 7:30, 8 o'clock, the staff on duty used to take round a drink, and it would be tea or cocoa, you know, and distribute it round the landings. That was what the staff did, and this guy had done so much of this that they called him Coco Bennett. Serious? I mean, imagine that, spending your whole life, 7 in the morning till 9 at night, 20, 30 days on the trot. That is just ridiculous, and it should not be allowed. Anyway, there came a time, and the governor called a meeting of all the staff in the prison, everybody, from the office staff, the kitchen staff, hospital staff, everybody who was available had to attend this meeting, and it was held in the chapel at the Strangeways, and it's seated probably about 300. So everybody's in there, and the governor gets on the stage. Standing next to him is the chief officer. Next to him is Brian Baldwin and the secretary of the local branch of the POA. And Brian Baldwin, of course, was the principal officer, chairman of the local branch of the POA. And at the back was 2 other chief officers, and they had notes. They were taking notes, these 2 officers at the back. The governor got up, and this would be 1979. This is Norman Brown, by the way. He got up and he said, we are here to announce that we've received a directive from the Home Office that as from this point in time, all individual prison officers will be personally responsible for the security and safety of the inmates in their charge. And this is a serious matter. I mean, don't forget, at the time, Strangeways prison held nearly 2,000 inmates in a prison designed for something like 600, 700. Yeah? And he was telling us that we were personally responsible. That meant that in the event that something went wrong, we were liable to be prosecuted, sued, anything, you know. So everybody was there, about 300 of the staff there, everybody. And I stood up and said, I want a point of order here. I am not responsible for putting 3 adult males into a cell designed in the era of Queen Victoria for 1 man. The persons responsible for that are in Westminster. They are filling the jails full beyond capacity, and to actually suggest that it's my responsibility to make sure of the safety of these people when they've overcrowded these prisons is an insult. And I personally am not responsible. Take note of that. And anybody who's got any sense in this room will follow my lead. We are not accepting this. And the POA, right, that's it, end of the meeting. The chief officer's struggling away. Brian Baldwin's trying to get order. There was uproar. They were trying to make me and all my fellow officers personally responsible for their shortcomings. And people wonder. They wonder why. Why did you start a breakaway trade union when you knew you couldn't win? Maybe I couldn't win but I gave them a dusting. We formed the Prison Force Federation, and I was elected as the first General Secretary. And then the POA told everybody I was an agent of Colonel Gaddafi, and that I was being funded by Libya, and that really I was a Marxist, Leninist, communist, and my mission was to undermine the security of the British prison system. In actual fact, I wanted a career. I didn't realise that what we had got, we were just going to be automatons, turnkeys. That's what they had in mind. Listen, when I joined, this is my cap badge. My cap badge. There we go. Yeah. See that? HM Prisons. That was on my hat, and I actually believed that I was entering a career, but I was just going to be turned into a dog's body by the Prison Officers Association, arsehole creeping up the backside of the governor. But not me. Tales from the jails.